As I stand here, I can't help making the comparison between the ARO and the iPhone. I'm sure all of you have made that comparison already. Not just because the iPhone was a game changer, although it clearly was, but because of the way Steve Jobs launched it on the market. You see, the big difference was that the iPhone was a beautiful and tangible product, something he could hold in his hands. Look, I've got one. And he could show the audience. Whereas the ARO is intangible, I'm afraid. It's merely an idea, and it therefore needs a different sort of presentation, one that focuses more on the concept and why people need it and want it. Of course, we aren't quite in the rarefied atmosphere of Apple, but others, for example. However, my mother used to tell me, think big, son, think big. So that's what I'm doing. The reason for having this event is to launch the ARO to as many interested parties as possible. I believe the ARO to be a killer app in the modern parlance, in its own right, a potential game changer for the industry. And I therefore want to get it out there into the public domain, start a debate aimed at moving it forward on its journey to become a nationwide proposition. So we already know pre-launch how successful it could be. It's already enabled us as a business to fully replace the income that we lost, and we lost a lot of income as a result of a tenant fee ban. And even at this early point, it's enabled us to grow our business by nearly 20%, in fact, sorry, just 20% compared to last year, year on year, and to grow our portfolio, even in a contracting market. So if you cut out the money that we lost from the fee ban, our growth has been even more impressive. So our proof of concept has shown that given the choice, the advanced rent option could appeal to around 20% of all landlords, 20%. That's 20% of all properties as well, and there are 4 million odd properties. That's a lot of properties. However, even those landlords who don't want or need the cash now are seriously interested enough to inquire, and therefore the advanced rent option is a fantastic lead generator in its own right. And I'm talking to estate agents now, obviously. A bit like Valpal on the sales piece. It's the holy grail of vendor lead generation, and the ARO has a similar potential as a lead generator for lettings, which is why we have an online advanced rent option calculator, which we're working on now and will come up quite soon. That will give a landlords the ability to find out exactly how much money they can get, literally at the click of a mouse. So the beauty of the ARO, like so many other killer apps, is its simplicity. Imagine asking this question, Mr. Landlord, you could have your rent paid monthly or a year in advance. Which would you prefer? You may be met with skepticism. Perhaps it sounds too good to be true. But it's not a trick question, it's real. And assuming everything else is like for like, who wouldn't want their rent paid up front for a year? And that's where I come back to my Superman versus Batman analogy. Imagine two great agents fighting for market share, one who's got the ARO and one who hasn't. The ARO wins every time, not only because all landlords will want it, but because it's a door opener, and even landlords who don't want it now will be intrigued and will like the idea that it could be available to them in the future. So if you're an agent, you may like to inquire whether we can help you introduce the ARO in your area. You're welcome to listen carefully now and try it on your own if you want. But if you want our help, and you might need it, you only have got to ask. And I have got a very exciting announcement to make on this subject. So we have been talking with many software suppliers, but tonight I can announce that we have agreed a partnership with Repit. For those of you who are estate agents, some of you might be using Repit. And Repit are going to be creating the ARO as an app, which is going to be the first, one of the first apps that they're going to be using on their new PAS platform, P-A-Z, don't know what that stands for. Anyone know what that stands for? Thank you. Good. Anyway, it sounded very impressive, and we're going to be one of the first. So Repit is one of them, and we are in open dialogue now with many of the softwares, and the idea is to make this as available as possible. Okay. You see, although the idea of the ARO is beautiful in its simplicity, that doesn't mean it's been easy to conceive or implement. See, like so many other cases, simple does not necessarily mean easy. Fundamentally, there are three challenges that we've had to overcome to make this proposition a reality. The first challenge has been a source of funds, and although we've met that challenge for our own business, it remains a challenge if we're going to expand rapidly. I think the total market I've calculated at something like 16 billion nationwide. Anyway, so source of funds is yet to be decided, and again, we don't know who is sitting here. So if there's any fund managers or institutional investors, we want to hear from you afterwards. Thank you. And the second challenge is that the concept creates is a bit more subtle. The question is, how can you pay a landlord rent up front for a year if the tenant is paying you monthly? You see, there's a massive difference between receiving rent and receiving money in any other form. Because if the money isn't rent, you have to decide what it is. And the conclusion you reach is it must therefore be a loan. For most agents, this is the point where the light bulb goes out. Why? Because lending money to people is a complicated and regulated activity. Not only would it be complicated and costly, most landlords would be put off by the paperwork. Might as well go to the bank. However, in our case, it turns out that we already have a solution in the bag, because for 10 years now, we've been operating and developing our own business model, which we call the primary tenancy, in which we not only act as agent, but we also become our landlord's primary tenant and sublet to the tenants who live in the property. Our model is often called rent-to-rent, which has actually had a lot of bad publicity caused by some players who go to agents, rent a property, and then sublet. The big difference is that in this scenario, there are 4 players in the game, not 3. The landlord, the agent, the rent-to-renter, and the tenant. But with the primary tenancy, there remains the traditional 3 players. Us as landlord and tenant, the landlord, and the people living in the property. So the primary tenancy, let's have a look. Okay, the primary tenancy sits at the base of our lettings proposition. There it is at the base of our lettings proposition. So the primary tenancy contains some powerful benefits of its own that are there even without the advanced rent option. The advanced rent option sits at the absolute top of the pyramid, or you could say it is the cherry on the cake, or better still in modern parlance, as I've already characterized it, a killer app. So let me quickly tell you why the primary tenancy was conceived. I'm sure everyone here remembers the global financial crisis of 2007-8, yes? Well, when it happened, I believed that property sales would contract and the lettings market would expand. And I was looking for a way to tap into this market by offering landlords guaranteed rent. I wanted to make this guarantee ourselves rather than by selling insurance. And this led me to the conclusion that in order to do so, we would have to become our landlord's tenants. I came to this conclusion independently of another successful agent you may have heard of, Northwoods, who, as many of you will know, initiated a similar model around the same time, but chose to franchise the idea. As a result of this thought process, the primary tenancy was born. But it turned out there were many challenges we had to meet before it became a fully developed business model. Over the years, it's had to be accepted by the HMRC, the Ombudsman, the courts, and we've had to establish a working process to cover every aspect of the model from an operational point of view. The primary tenancy has shown itself to be far more versatile than was first expected. Quite apart from giving us the option of giving guaranteed rent without the need to sell insurance, it has allowed us to build an agreement with other optional benefits built in, like a zero deposit option. Sorry, John, I'm going to say that. But anyway, and we call, so we also have a tenant rent guarantee, which enables us to forgive a tenant up to a year's rent if they go off sick or have an accident. And of course, finally, it's given birth to the advanced rent option. And there are other fundamental benefits that apply to the landlord, us as agents, and the tenants themselves. The landlords get a professional tenant who protects their privacy and can deal directly with any problem tenants and takes all of the regulatory obligations away from them. Tenants get a professional landlord, one who is always compliant and will always treat them fairly. And this last point is very important because it chimes well with government policy, which is aimed at encouraging corporate landlords because it's easier to regulate a smaller number of big landlords than a larger number of small ones. Now, whether this is fair or a good thing is a different question, and one that may well come up later in the panel debate in which we will discuss the future of the industry, but it is a fact of life right now. And the final benefit of the primary tenancy is to us as agents, as it increases our appeal as well as our margins with its inbuilt additional income streams, as well as a favourable VAT treatment, which comes from being a profit rent rather than the fee-based business model. The final challenge of the ARO was how to ensure that we get our money back from the tenants. Of course, we make the same checks we normally do, so defaults are very low. But to reduce this risk still further, we take out rent guarantee insurance, something that landlords are entitled to do, so that if for any reason we get a default, we're still covered. So, the primary tenancy has allowed us to create a highly innovative service which integrates additional optional benefits like rent guarantees, zero deposits, and the advanced rent option in a way that's better, safer, and more profitable than conventional agency. More so than any other time I can remember, we are at a time of change in this industry, and it takes a time of change in order for a transition to take place from the established way of doing things. It needs a compelling proposition. The primary tenancy has the potential to herald in such a change to the whole industry. We're open-minded about how we develop the concept of the primary tenancy and the advanced rent option to its full potential. We'd like to see it being adopted by good agents and are open to commercial arrangements to do so. We're looking at ways we can extend the advanced rent option beyond the scope of our existing resources on a direct basis, which means a funding solution needs to be found. We're speaking to a number of interested parties and examining several potential solutions, but no decision has yet been made. So as I said, if anyone knows anyone, I'm very interested to hear. Once again, I would like to thank everybody here for coming to the event, and I hope that you've got some insight into the ARO and can get some benefit in it as far as you're concerned, whether you're an agent, an investor, a developer, a supplier, or a landlord.